we've explored how to insert data and how to edit data and then save those changes or cancel them. But now it's time to take a closer look at how we delete data and also to prompt the user to make sure that they actually intended to delete the data, just to make sure they didn't make a mistake. So in this module, you'll learn how you can delete data, and also we're going to be using a modal dialog to prompt the user to confirm that they want to delete the data. And for that, we're going to take advantage of some of the Bootstrap features. And sometimes when you delete data on the client, you have to make sure that anything else that's depending on that data is also synced up. So we'll take a close look at how you can clean up some client-side logic after delete, and some important considerations when you do deletes. And to apply these principles, we're going to be showing how to delete sessions from the CodeCamper application because maybe a session was removed from the schedule. Our user story in our application is that a user may want to delete a session. So we're going to need to have some way to allow that user to do it. In our case, we're going to have a delete button right here. And when a user clicks that button, we want to make sure that it deletes the session from the client and the server. And the way that Breeze allows us to do this is through the entity's entity aspect property. So first, we start off with an entity. In our case, that's going to be the session. Pretty easy. And then we go on to that entity's entity aspect property. Now, where did that come from, you might be asking? Well, Breeze is going to decorate all of your entities with this property. An example of some things you can do through the entity aspect is you can interrogate the entity aspect to find out what the entity's state is. Is it unchanged or has it been detached? And one of the methods you can fire off of entity aspect is setDeleted. So when we call it setDeleted, it's going to mark that entity to be deleted. It's not actually going to delete it yet. It's basically just going to put the entity in a detached state. It will still exist on the client and of course on the server where it came from, but the entity will remove itself from all of its relations. Once it's in this detached state, then if you want to delete it, you can call the entity manager's saveChanges method. And because that'll see all the changes, one of which is this detached state, it'll then go ahead and delete that on the client and the server. Now this is the same saveChanges method that we've been calling for the inserts and the updates too. So let's go add this code to our session details. First thing we want to do is go ahead and add a button to the session detail page to allow us to delete one of the sessions. And we'll put this button right after our save button. We'll give it a class of button danger. It's going to make it red. That's one of the Bootstrap classes. And then when we click on this, we'll use ngClick to allow us to do the delete. And this will call right into our controller and call the delete session method. And let's also give this an icon. We'll use a trash can. And we'll put the word delete in the button. Now we're referring to this function delete session in the controller, but we don't have it yet. So let's go into session detail and let's add this. First, we need to expose it. So we'll put it up here in alphabetical order. We'll come down below the cancel and can save. We'll create a function here called delete session. Now we're going to use Breeze to set this entity to be deleted. So first, we're going to do a little refactoring here. Since we're actually talking with Breeze and we've encapsulated all of Breeze's functionality inside the data context or the repositories, we'll defer this to the data context to call the markDeleted method, which we have yet to create. And we'll pass it in the session that we want to mark to be deleted. So we'll put a to-do here to go refactor that. And then after it's been marked to be deleted, the next step is to actually call the save. And we already have a save method here. So let's go find that. And right down here is the save method, which is basically just going to call the data context save and handle any changes we have. In this case, the change is going to be delete that record that we just marked to be deleted. So now it's time to refactor this. We're going to go create the markDeleted method inside the data context. And that's inside the services folder. And here we're going to expose the marked to be deleted. We'll scroll down. I like to keep my methods in alphabetical order, just helps me find them. Now this is going to accept in the entity that we're going to be marking to be deleted, so we'll pass that in as a parameter. And then we're going to call the entity's entity aspect. We're going to call its setDeleted method. And then we'll return that. And that's all we need to mark this to be deleted. So back inside the controller, somebody clicks the button for deleting a session. It calls into this function. We're going to tell the data context, please mark this particular session to be deleted, and then save it. So let's run our code and try out the delete. We'll open the developer tools and clear the cache. Now let's go to a session. Oh, let's pick one by Elijah Manor. We'll get rid of this one here. And then we'll hit the delete button. And it says it saved our data. But if the cancel works, we actually want to go back a screen because we don't want to stay on the deleted item. Because we're using promises, this is pretty easy to wire up. So let's go do that. The entity no longer exists, so basically we delete a session and it's gone. Well, we want to get off the page too. So because the save returns a promise, we can then use a then here to say go call a success function. And we can add in a failed as well. We'll create those here. And on success of deleting out that session, we're just going to tell it to go to the sessions page. And when it fails, we'll just cancel. Now it's worth pointing out that because we're just calling a single method inside success, we could have just taken this go to sessions here and called it directly from the then right there. But I like to do it like this because maybe I want to perform something else later based upon the success of that method. This way I can add in more code. So now let's try to do a delete. And first things first, we'll open up the developer tools and refresh the cache. We'll go to a session, and let's pick one by my friend Elijah Manor. Pick this one here with a nonsense name, and there's our delete button. We'll click on that, and notice that it deleted it, and then it said save the data, and now we have 119 sessions. So if we look for Elijah again in the list, we only see this one here, which is the other session that he had. Now you might be wondering what happens if you didn't mean to delete Elijah Manor's session like I just did a moment ago. Well, that can happen, and that's the case of the accidental delete. So how do you prevent that from happening? Well, you want to protect the user from themselves and make sure you give them a confirmation dialog. And for us, we're going to use one that comes with the UI Bootstrap library. And the UI Bootstrap library is a set of directives that allows us to tie in the Bootstrap features, things like a modal dialog, in with Angular. It's going to supply the Angular directives so we can simplify the functionality inside the UI. And basically it allows us to take two really popular libraries, Bootstrap and Angular, and make them work together. So what's the net result? We want to have some kind of a confirmation dialog like this here, where it's modal and we ask, hey, did you really mean to delete that session? And then the user gets an opportunity to say, yeah, I really did, so they hit the OK button, or they can cancel and say, oh, wait a second, I didn't mean to do that. Now at the beginning of this course, we pulled in Hot Towel. Hot Towel makes it easier to work with the modal dialog by creating a pass-through. Basically just makes it easier to call into the dialog. And you can find this inside the common folder of your app. So we've had this all along, and it's going to wrap up some of the reusable aspects of the UI Bootstrap modal dialog inside of a reusable module. So Hot Towel wraps up this functionality inside of a module called common.bootstrap. So let's take a closer look at how this is going to work. Here's some quick code and demonstrate how this is going to work for us. Inside a delete session, before we actually perform the delete, which we do down in the confirm delete, instead we're going to do something like this where we actually prompt the user first. So we'll call into the Bootstrap dialog and then call its function delete dialog. And that session string is the title of what it wants to delete. So you can prompt the user, hey, do you want to delete a session? And then if the user confirms that they want to delete, it'll call the first function there, confirm delete. It'll mark it to be deleted and then perform the delete, just like we have the code for now. This just adds that extra safeguard for the users to give them the opportunity to either back out of the delete or to actually perform it. It's not very nice to just perform a delete without asking the user if they really wanted to do that, because sometimes we click on things that we don't mean to. So now we need a way to ask the user if they want to delete, and to do that we're going to add a modal dialog. So before we delete, we're going to ask the user if they really wanted to do that. And for this, we're going to use this BS dialog service. And we'll create that dependency in just a moment. And it's got a delete dialog method. And we're going to tell it the name of the thing we're going to delete is session. That's just the text it's going to put in the modal dialog. And because it's going to return a promise, we're going to return back from this. And when it's done with the confirmation, we want to know what they decided. And the first option is going to be call this confirm delete method. So that's basically going to contain all the rest of this functionality. Let's create a function here called confirm delete. And this will get fired if the user chooses yes, I would like to delete. And then we just call our same old logic. If we wanted to call something if they said no, we could put a second parameter in here to call another function. But we don't need that. So we don't know what this BS dialog thing is. Let's go create that dependency now. At the top of our code, we have another dependency to put in here. And it's not actually called BS dialog, it's called Bootstrap dialog. Now here we're demonstrating that you don't actually have to name the dependency the same as your variable. The important part is what's in the string here is what's been registered as the name of the service. So where did this Bootstrap dialog come from? Well, it's inside of app common right up here. We can see this Bootstrap folder, and there's a bootstrap.dialog.js file. And right at the top of that file, we can see there's a factory that's registering this Bootstrap dialog. So this name right here has to be named the same as what we have inside of the session detail dependency. So it's going to resolve the dependency for Bootstrap dialog, and then the variable BS dialog is going to represent that. And then down inside of delete session, we're going to call into that dialog. And then if the user says yes, then we're going to go ahead and delete it. If they say no, we're just going to pass over the rest of this code. So let's run it and test it. And again, we'll open up the developer tools and refresh. Clears out the cache. We'll hit the sessions. And now this time, let's go to Elijah's other session. So we'll click on the Amplify It session. And now if I click the delete button, it should prompt me. Do you want to delete the session? Say, oh, no, wait a minute. Didn't mean to do that. I'll hit cancel. It stays right here. Or I can click on delete again and say, yeah, I really did mean to delete you. Sorry, Elijah. And now it deletes it and moves on along. Now that we solved the problem of the accidental delete, let's take a closer look at what we're doing inside the Bootstrap dialog. And up top, we're registering it in a module called Common Bootstrap. In my projects, there's always some common functionality that I can share across multiple projects. One of those happens to be a modal dialog. So I wrapped up some common things I like to do with the UI Bootstrap's modal dialog, and I put it inside this module here called common.bootstrap. And it depends upon the UI Bootstrap module. So we register this module name here. It depends upon this other one. And then we're going to create the Bootstrap dialog service. And it itself has some dependencies of $modal and $template cache. The former, $modal, is actually one that's used inside of the UI Bootstrap module. And that's actually its modal dialog, basically what we're going to wrap. And the template cache service is something that Angular provides, so we can basically create templates that are reusable. So we inject those into our modal dialog, and I'm exposing two functions, delete dialog and confirmation dialog. Delete dialog is what we called from the session detail controller, right here. In fact, it's actually just a wrapper that calls into the confirmation dialog. Let's take a look at that. So down here, our delete dialog, we're going to set the title to be confirm delete, and then the item name is going to be whatever we pass in. We happen to pass in session. So then the message that's going to be prompted to the user will be delete session. If you don't pass one in, I just default to item. And then I'm just calling this confirmation dialog, passing in the title and the message. Now the confirmation dialog doesn't have to be a delete, so basically I'm just passing in the title and the message to override it to say be a delete. It just makes it a convenience. It also accepts in the OK button and cancel button text. So you can call them yes and no if you'd like to. Now for a confirm of delete, I want it to just be OK and cancel, so I didn't bother passing those in. And then default values are used. And the confirmation dialog is going to use this template here. It's called modaldialog.tpl.html. Now where does that come from? Well, that's where the template cache comes into play. Up here, we're telling Angular when it creates this modal dialog service, go ahead and put in the template cache this thing here. We're going to call it modaldialog.tpl.html, and that matches up with the name down here that we used. And then the HTML for that template is going to be basically the HTML that we use for our modal dialog. Now it's worth pointing out that I could have just taken the HTML and not embedded it into the strings here and put it inside of a folder as an actual HTML file. And quite often that's what I do with my templates, but because it wasn't a whole lot of HTML, I decided it would be easier just to put it right inside of here. And you can notice that we've got the title binding and the message binding right here. And we're binding to an OK and cancel function. So when we run this, we're creating this name template, and that's what the template is going to be defined as. So when we use that template down here, it'll actually just pick up that HTML. And the controller that's going to be created for this is actually listed down here. It's called the modal instance. So down below, we can bind up the title, the message, the OK button's text, and the cancel button's text. And again, the defaults are OK and cancel. All those could be overridden. And then finally, we've got our OK and cancel functions. That's what's being called inside the template when you do the ng click. Now, do you have to know how all this is working? Not really, because it's already wrapped up for you inside of Hot Towel. But it's a good example of how you can encapsulate some logic and wrap it up into your own module and service. So this functionality is inside of the common Bootstrap module. And if we go back and look inside of our app, right here in app.js, we can see we're actually including the common Bootstrap module as a dependency for our app. We have a bit of a problem in our application. If we delete a session or just change a speaker for a session, this may make someone not be a speaker anymore. So how do we handle this? Well, right now we can see we have 36 speakers. So let's go inside of the session. Let's look for John Smith. He's got 2 sessions here. Let's delete his second one. Now when we delete this, we'll get the confirmation dialog and hit OK. And now let's go back and delete his other session. Now we've deleted both of John Smith's sessions. We should not have 36 speakers anymore. We should have 35. So let's go ahead and look for Smith in here, make sure we actually got rid of the sessions. We did. Now let's go over to the speakers. And notice we have 36. And lo and behold, if we search for Smith, he's still there. And that's because we didn't actually synchronize the data on the client. Now I could refresh this from the server. And now it says 35, but if we go off of sessions and back to speakers, we still have 36. Smith is still there. So just like a bad penny, he keeps on turning up. And the reason this is happening is because we're not resetting the isSpeaker flag. So even though we deleted John Smith's sessions, John Smith still exists. He's actually a person, and all persons are attendees, so that record is still here on the client. And we deleted the sessions for him, but we did not reset the isSpeaker property for that person to be false. And this could happen if we delete sessions or if we reassign somebody's sessions to another person. So the way we're going to solve this is to reset the client-side property isSpeaker right here after we perform our save. So when we change a speaker for a session, or we actually delete a session, we need to make sure that we recalculate the isSpeaker property for that speaker. Now we only have one place inside of the session detail where we actually perform the save, and that's in our save method. So that's good. And here we want to write a little bit of code to make sure we recalculate the isSpeaker property. Now because this relates to modifying the data on a speaker, this really belongs inside of our speaker repository. So we're going to call the data context to get to our repository for the speaker. And we'll call this function calc isSpeaker. So now let's copy the name of that function, and we'll go inside of the repository. And first things first, let's expose it. And we'll come down here and create it. Now we're going to call this whenever we want to reset the isSpeaker flag. But first, we'll get a reference to this, and then we need to get a list of all the persons. And to do that, we're going to use a feature in Breeze Authentic Manager called getEntities. We could execute a local query against Breeze to get all the persons, but since we're getting every single one of them, it's actually more efficient just to call getEntities. And I think it actually reads a little bit simpler. Now in here, we've got this entity names property, which has got a type of person. So now we're just saying, please go to all the persons. And we're also going to need all the sessions. So we'll copy that code. We'll change this one to sessions. And don't forget to change the session on the far right. So now we have an easy handle on all the persons and all the sessions. Next, we need to loop through all the persons and set their isSpeaker flag to false. So we'll do a quick for each, create a function, and then we'll set its isSpeaker property equal to false. And yes, that's going to make every single person not be a speaker anymore. So we won't have speakers for a brief moment in time. After we reset all the persons' isSpeaker flag to be false, we're going to loop through all the sessions and then find out who their speakers are and set the speaker flag to true. So for every session that we have, we'll set the speaker.isSpeaker property, and we'll use a little bit of logic to make sure we set the isSpeaker flag properly. So we'll say, okay, if the speaker ID is not equal to 0, then we're okay, that's the speaker. So set that to true. So why are we checking not equal to 0? Because we could have a speaker who is actually the nullo speaker, which we added in the previous module, and that's got an ID of 0. So first we go through and set all the people to not be speakers, and then we go back and we say, all right, go through all the sessions, and for every one of those, find their speaker and set that particular person record, the speaker, to have isSpeaker equal to true. And now this function is going to be called whenever we change something on a session or we delete a session. So let's run our code and test this out. Now open up Developer Tools, refresh the cache. We'll go back into the sessions. Now let's go find friend Howard Durking. We'll choose his first session, we'll delete it, hit OK. And then we'll just go check to make sure how many speakers we have. We haven't deleted his second session yet. We have 35 speakers here. And Howard is right down there. Now let's go back to the sessions. We have one session left from Howard. Let's click on it. We'll delete it, hit OK. And now when we go over to speakers, we should see 34 speakers. And Howard no longer exists down here. And if I go off of sessions and back onto speakers, you still don't see Howard. So now we can see that our function is working properly and we've recalculated the isSpeaker flag on the client. And I demonstrate this because sometimes when you delete records, there are repercussions like this. So it's good to know how to solve them. In this module, we took a look at some deleting strategies to show us how we can delete data from our application. And we just wrapped up with how we can handle some of the side effects of a delete, such as when we deleted a speaker and then we had to reset the isSpeaker flag. We saw how Breeze allows us to mark an entity to be deleted using the entity aspect on the entity. So we can say entity.entity_aspect.setDeleted, and that tells Breeze that this entity is ready to be deleted. It doesn't actually delete it yet. And then we actually perform the delete using the save changes on the entity manager. Now, because we don't want to have one of those accidental deletes, we looked at how we can handle modal dialogues inside the app. So we looked at some modal strategies using the UI Bootstrap library. And we wrapped all that inside of a common module called common.bootstrap. And creating a common module is a great way for you to reuse your code across multiple projects. So now we've covered inserts, updates, and deletes, basically all the CRUD operations that we need for our application.